For years, viewers of Matt Armstrong's YouTube channel have watched him tear apart wrecked, flooded, and written off cars, and bring them back to life. The builds are impressive. The results are often jaw-dropping. But almost from the beginning, a quieter conversation was happening in the comments section, in forums, and across the automotive community. How much of Matt's success was really his own? The question wasn't random. Matt's father, Tony Armstrong, a lifelong mechanic, appeared regularly in the videos, offering advice, diagnosing problems, and working alongside Matt in the garage. For casual viewers, it looked like a wholesome father-son dynamic. But for others, it raised something more pointed. Was Tony the real engine behind the operation, doing the hard technical work while Matt handled the camera? Those questions deserve real answers. And once you hear what Tony has actually said about their working relationship, the picture looks very different from what the rumors suggested. Speculation about Tony's involvement started quietly in Leicester and gradually spread across the wider automotive community until almost everyone seemed to have an opinion. The concerns broke down into a few recurring themes. First, there was the question of technical ability. Some viewers found it hard to believe that a young creator, still learning the trade, could complete increasingly complex restorations without someone more experienced doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes. As the builds got bigger and more ambitious, that doubt grew louder. Could Matt really be responsible for all of it? Second, there were questions about financial advantage. Having access to Tony's garage meant, in some people's minds, free tools, free workspace, and free parts. That's a significant head start in a hobby and a business, where costs add up fast. Critics argued that Matt's path had been made smoother than he let on, and that the playing field wasn't level compared to other creators starting from nothing. Third, and most persistently, people wondered whether the early builds were really Matt's work at all. The projects improved over time, yes, but was that because Matt was genuinely learning? Or because Tony was gradually handing over more control? These weren't unreasonable questions. They were, however, based on assumptions that turned out to be wrong. Tony addressed the speculation directly, and his explanation dismantles the narrative of unfair advantage piece by piece. On the question of financial support, Matt worked through the business the same way any employee would. Even during the years when BMX riding occupied most of his focus, Matt held multiple part-time jobs to cover his costs, delivering food, working behind a bar, putting in time at automotive retail stores and tuning shops. Money for parts didn't materialize out of nowhere. Everything had to be earned and paid for. The garage was a place to learn, not a place to take shortcuts. On the question of early builds, Tony is clear that the actual hands-on work was done by Matt. Growing up around a garage environment meant Matt had absorbed years of watching, listening, and asking questions before he ever picked up a wrench on camera. When problems came up during early projects, Tony offered advice, but the tools stayed in Matt's hands. That's guidance, not substitution. It's the same dynamic that exists in any workshop where an experienced mechanic mentors someone still developing their skills. Suggestions get made. Mistakes get corrected. Lessons get learned. But the person doing the build carries the responsibility for it. That distinction matters, because it explains something the videos themselves show clearly. The early projects weren't perfect. They improved over time, build by build, in exactly the way real learning looks. If Tony had been quietly doing the difficult work all along, you'd expect a higher baseline from the start. Instead, you see someone genuinely getting better. On the larger collaborative projects, builds like the Ferrari F430, Tony explains that those were genuine joint efforts, each of them handling different parts of the job. Experience meets fresh energy. Knowledge meets curiosity. That's not one person carrying another. That's a partnership where both sides contribute something the other doesn't have. Understanding what Tony contributes to the channel requires understanding what he doesn't do, and that's just as important. Tony doesn't take over. He doesn't perform for the camera or try to position himself as the real expert behind the curtain. He shows up when he's useful, says what needs to be said, helps move the build forward, and then steps back. That kind of involvement, confident, unshowy, and completely genuine, is harder to maintain than it looks, especially as the channel's audience grew into the millions. What Tony brings is something that can't be faked and can't be fast-tracked. Instinct built from decades in real garages, fixing real cars for real customers. When something unexpected shows up during a build, a system behaving in a way it shouldn't, a component that doesn't match what the manual says, Tony can look at the problem and suggest a direction quickly. That's not book knowledge. That's pattern recognition from years of experience, and it saves enormous amounts of time. The workshop dynamic between Matt and Tony is also, quietly, one of the biggest reasons people keep watching. The cars are interesting. The builds are technically impressive. But the real hook for a lot of viewers is the relationship itself. You're watching two people who genuinely know each other well enough to disagree, joke, get frustrated, and still keep working. When something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, the camera catches Matt's reaction and Tony's calm response. Those moments aren't scripted and they can't be manufactured. They're the product of a real relationship playing out in a shared space, and audiences can feel the difference. The emotional weight of the partnership became impossible to ignore in 2025, when Matt took on a flood-damaged Aston Martin DBX, not as a regular channel project, but as a surprise for Tony. The choice of car was deliberate. The project wasn't really about the vehicle. It was about acknowledgement. Years earlier, Tony had provided the tools, the space, the advice, and the encouragement that made everything else possible. Before there was an audience, before there were sponsors, before any of it made obvious sense as a career. The surprise rebuild was Matt's way of bringing that support full circle in the most personal way he could think of. The finished video drew over 6 million views. That number says something. Audiences weren't tuning in purely for the restoration. They were watching because the relationship between Matt and Tony had become something they were genuinely invested in. And a moment that made that relationship visible in an unexpected way landed exactly as it should have. Toward the end of 2025, the scale of Matt's projects shifted noticeably upward. The most significant undertaking involved a damaged Bugatti Chiron Per Sport, one of only around 60 ever built, that had been declared a total loss by insurers after a serious incident. The car had previously belonged to American influencer Alex Gonzalez before ending up at auction. Matt traveled to Miami to inspect it and made the decision to bring it back. On paper, that sounds straightforward. In practice, it represents one of the most demanding restoration challenges imaginable. Sourcing parts for a car produced in such limited numbers isn't a matter of placing an order and waiting. It requires deep connections in the automotive world, precise technical knowledge, and a level of patience that most projects never demand. Nothing can be approximated. Everything has to be exact. A mistake that might be correctable on a common vehicle can be catastrophic on something this rare. Running alongside the Bugatti project was a crashed Ferrari F430, previously used as a rental car, which added its own layer of uncertainty to the condition assessment. The plan wasn't simply to repair the damage. The goal was to restore the car to factory standards while also fitting a Capristo exhaust system, adding a performance and acoustic dimension that pushed the project beyond standard restoration territory. Both builds represent a clear upward shift in complexity, and Tony's role in both has been correspondingly more significant. When the systems are this sophisticated and the margin for error this narrow, the kind of diagnostic instinct Tony carries becomes less of a bonus and more of a necessity. Strip away the speculation, and what's left is actually quite simple. Matt Armstrong built his channel through genuine effort, developed skills, and a willingness to take on projects that most people would walk away from. Tony Armstrong contributed decades of real-world experience, honest guidance, and a consistent presence that shaped both the quality of the builds and the feel of the channel. Neither of them was carrying the other. Both were contributing something irreplaceable. The family connection didn't make things easier in the ways critics assumed. It made things better in ways that are harder to quantify. A shared language in the workshop, a trust built over a lifetime, and an honesty on camera that no amount of production value can replicate. As the projects get bigger and the stakes get higher, that foundation only matters more. Bigger challenges haven't slowed anything down. If anything, they've made the partnership more visible for exactly what it's always been.